Hello, hello, and I am back. I took January off, and as you can see, my living situation has changed. I got me an apartment. I am here today to tell you the top best books of 2022 and books that I would recommend you read in 2023. They're a good blend of fiction and nonfiction, so let's get into it. They're in no particular order, by the way. First, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. If you've been living under a rock, Jennette McCurdy is a semi-famous actress who had a starring role on the Nickelodeon show iCarly. Now, I was a bit older when iCarly came out, so I only watched a few episodes. I wasn't a stan or anything, but this is a memoir of hers about her time, both in her childhood and in her career, as she struggles with her dysfunctional family, with the pressures of Hollywood, with a eating disorder, an abusive, controlling mom, and her process of seeking help and finally going to therapy and things like that. And this book was worth the hype, let me tell you, like 500%. You can really tell that Jennette has been working at her craft. Like, she actually didn't want to be an actress, she wanted to be a writer, and I think it shows with how solid her chapters are and on like a sentence by sentence level. Like, not only are the scenes really crisp and descriptive and so vulnerable and revealing, like hot damn, like props to her. I mean, like, I listened to the audiobook, which is also read by her, and I think had like an extra touching factor because not only is she an actress, so like her ability to narrate her own story was just really well done, but there was that like emotional quality to her voice at parts that just like, ugh. If you were weary because of how popular it got, there's a reason. It's really good. Pick it up. Next we have The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is a very thoughtful collection of essays, and is this the first nonfiction by John Green? John Green, if you don't know, is traditionally a young adult author and a YouTuber, just a cool ass dude. I think this is one of the best things he ever wrote. It has a blend of all the things that you can appreciate in John Green's like young adult writing, which is intelligence, the thoughtfulness, the humor, and also just the like humanity, like the vulnerable, raw side to things. And the essays talk about a variety of different things. It kind of runs the gambit from like Mario Kart to this like extinct bird. I also listened to this on audiobook. It's also read by the author, and it was so good. It was such a good time. And I think whether you get a physical copy or you listen to the audiobook, you can't really go wrong. It's just really good. And if you're not a huge nonfiction fan, I think you would still appreciate this. Then we have Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a contemporary romance about two writers who meet over the summer or re-meet, I should say, because they know each other. And they're both in like a writer's block, and they come up with a bet where they're going to swap genres. So the contemporary romance writer is going to have to write literary fiction, and the literary fiction writer is going to have to figure out how to write a happy ending. And it's so good. So good! Again, this was another book that was really overhyped. Bit of a negative Nelly. So I was ready to, like, I was weary going in, and it was so readable. It was so good, and it's one of the few romances I've read where it didn't sacrifice the flaws and vulnerability of just like being a messy human in this world for the sake of the romance. It's very much these two flawed, complex people falling in love, and so you still get the parts of a romance, but it's the full package. It's not like just a like so sweet it becomes like hard to eat kind of thing. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Per usual, I have to relate it to food. But anyway, trust me, it's good. Next we have The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, and this was popular a couple years ago, so per usual, she is behind, but it was really good. I struggled trying to describe it to my friends, but there was this like melancholy feel. Like, it's not even like the character was like projecting this feeling of melancholy or like, I don't know, it was very surreal, very literary. You know, it's got a touch of that like Japanese weirdness that they like to do in their storytelling, and it was interesting. It was very interesting. It like definitely had like kind of a lingering presence after I'd finished it. But I will emphasize, if you're not familiar with like surreal or literary, you might not be pleased with the ending. And the way it was kind of marketed as like a Japanese contemporary to 1984 might also give people the wrong impression of what they're getting into because of those surrealist and more like quieter Japanese storytelling elements. The one thing I'll say is it took us a second for me to sink into the story. You know, it's a book, so it's in written form, and the story, if you don't know, is about like this small island of people, and collectively whoever's in charge will suddenly decide that something's no longer going to exist in the collective consciousness. So like it might be a red ribbon or something like that, and the people just know that from time to time things like that will happen where that item will lose like all value, and like they won't even remember the word for it like over time. And so that's the thing that confused me in the beginning. So it's one of those things where it's not like today at this time I won't remember what the cell phone is anymore. It's kind of like starts with like lack of emotional attachment to it, and it eventually recedes from your memory entirely until you look at it and you wouldn't know it's a cell phone. But the problem is because it's in written format, they have to still like say what the thing is, right? So like the book, the narrative will be like bird, even though people have forgotten what birds are. And so I'm like, it took me a second. Maybe this is just me, but I think if it was in a film format, it would have been easier for me to like buy into the premise a lot faster. All that being said, Kelly's problems aside, it was a really good book. Highly recommend. I think any book that keeps you thinking about it after you've finished it, that's a good sign. That's a sign of a kind of special book there. Then we have Blasphemy by Sherman Alexie. It's a collection of short stories. I know there's a bit of hubbub about the author, which I won't get into, but libraries exist, used bookstores exist, so you don't have to support authors you don't like. Any hoozle. Short story collections are always hit or miss for me, which makes sense by its very nature. You know, when you have short stories, authors have the opportunity to try a bunch of different things, have a bunch of different characters. You're not going to connect with every single story. I could not point to a single story I did not like in this collection. I thought they were all either interesting or funny or impactful or thought-provoking, and it was really cool to kind of see from a different angle, from like a Native American point of view, and the different things that they're interacting with and struggling with, and challenges and successes. Highly recommend. It's just good. It's good writing. Yeah. It's crazy because it's like I read a lot, so I don't always remember specific nuggets to tell you guys, and if I do, it's normally like the nuggets that are spoilers. So I hope you're okay with this vague, you know, vague review. But if you're interested, definitely check it out, and I'd recommend something like bookshop.com, which I'll have a link in the description, to avoid giving more money to Amazon and Jeff Bezos. Next we have This Is Your Mind on Plants by Michael Pollan. This is a nonfiction book about caffeine, opium, and what is the third one? You can tell I'm professional. But really good book. I also read this as an audiobook. It's also read by the author. I think that's like the best way to go, because obviously they wrote the thing, so they kind of know best. Like it's so natural for them to sink into the narrative that they've created. But I like Michael Pollan, very natural writing style. He sounds like a fun friend who does these wacky things and then just tells you about it over like tea. And I learned so much fun, interesting things about like coffee and the history of tea, and yeah, it's just so much fun. I would highly recommend it. I recommend it to people in my real life, and thought I'd give it a shout out here. Next we have Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. Probably sick of me talking about it. It is a historical generational drama about a family originating in Korea, leading all the way up to, I think, 1980s Japan. And I'm not a huge fan normally of historical fiction or generational sagas, so this won me over. It's also a fat book. It's really thick, but super readable. I highly recommend reading it on ebook like I did, because then it's only the weight of your phone and it's with you everywhere. It's super great and convenient. You don't have to worry about breaking the spine. I know it makes it sound like I just discovered ebooks yesterday, but it was life-changing for me. Any hoozle. Great, story, and you have this like large cast and point of view characters, but it's a great process of writing where you're invested in what's going to happen overall to not just the individual characters but to the family, and you learn so much about history and you learn so much about culture and all of these conflicts and struggles so naturally ingrained within the story. It's never info dumpy. It's never like, okay, we have a whole chapter where they have to catch me up on what happened in Japan in the 1910s or whatever. It just flows. And I got through this book so fast, and it's like 600 pages. So even if you're not a normal fan of historical fiction or generational sagas, if you want to dip your toe in, I'd highly recommend this one. Got 2 more to go, folks. So we have Sunburned Country by Bill Bryson. This is like a travel memoir. I've read several books by Bill Bryson. I think this is my favorite so far. He's a really funny dude, and this is his time exploring Australia. He has a great blend of like his travel experience interspersed with like the history or the research he did leading up to his trip and like the quirky characters he finds. And I was so happy reading this book. I read it at the start of 2022, and it was such a great way to start the year out. I was just smiling, like just following along with my good old friend Bill as he bumbles around Australia. If you're needing a little smile, I'd highly recommend it. And lastly, we have The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down by Hemin Sunam. And this is an interesting one. I actually listened to it on audiobook back when I was in massage school. It's written by a Korean monk, I believe. And the book kind of came about because he was like posting it on Twitter. He was tweeting as you do. And what a world we live in. Like even monks are tweeting. But anyway, people loved it. He developed a following, and they're like, yo, you should do a book. So this book is very much like various short stories and almost like vignette formats. They're like brief moments, like little segments to reflect on. So it was just very soothing to listen to and very reflective to, you know, take a walk and listen to it. But also I'd imagine kind of a great book if you are busy in life, because you can just read a little bit and then put it down. Like it's not like urgent, like if you're reading a fiction book and need to know what happens next. And so there you go. We have the top books that I read in 2022. I highly recommend you pick them up if you haven't. And I would love to hear what your top books of 2022 were. Have you read any of mine? Which ones sound interesting to you? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.